Vitality. I would like to call to order the Community Vitality and Safety Committee meeting of July 14th, 2022. Clerk, will you please call roll?
Councilmember Daniels.
Here.
Councilmember Rumba.
Here.
Vice Chair Blocker.
Here.
Chair Ushka, absent.
All right. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Minutes have been, motion carried. Minutes have been approved. Next, we have briefing items. I would like to call on Kate Larson of the Tacoma Public Library.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Blocker. Hi, CVS. It's good to be before you today. As you know, I'm Kate Larson. I'm the director of Tacoma Public Library. I almost said I am the Tacoma Public Library, which would be completely wrong. I'm joined also by two library trustees, President Sarah Irish and Vice President Donna LaFrance. And we're excited to be here today to provide you with the concluding report on the feasibility study for the restoration of library services on Hilltop and East Side. So Burke Consulting is going to be doing the presentation. We have Brian Murphy here, who is a principal at Burke. He is the project manager on this project. And Vivian Savath, who is is it assistant principal? I just spaced. Is that right?
Be a principal, thanks.
Okay. Who also worked on this project. And so I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Well, thank you, Kate. Good evening, council members. So glad to be here tonight. I want to mention as well that we're joined by Susan Kent, who's had an invaluable contribution to the project as well. And brings a great deal of library expertise given her long career in libraries. Vivian and I will carry the bulk of the presentation, but actually we're really hoping for some robust discussion and Q&A, and Susan and Kate and others I'm sure will be participating in that as well. So I will go ahead and share my screen, but while I do that, I will mention that we were last in front of this group in October 2021. So it has been a little while since we've been in front of you, and we've done an awful lot of work in the interim and are excited to share our findings and our recommendations with you all. As I mentioned, we'll walk through a brief presentation, share our top line findings, a little bit about the process, and then open it up for more discussion. I think it's important to start with a little bit of history, and I know we all know this, right? But I think the broad context is important. So the story goes back probably earlier than this, but I'm going to start in 2011 when Swan Creek and Martin Luther King branches were closed due to budget cuts. And shortly thereafter, the Hilltop Library Planning Committee was formed. And since that day to today, and including tonight, I'm sure they're in the audience, they have been a consistent and persistent voice asking for the resumption of library services in the Hilltop and by extension in the East Side. Kate Larson as a city librarian, and then the council, the Tacoma City Council chose to invest in this study of how to best address the disinvestment that occurred of library services in some of the monetarily less affluent and more diverse neighborhoods in Tacoma. And we know that today, the East Side and the Hilltop are younger and more diverse than Tacoma and Pierce County overall. As shown on the slide, about 8% of the population in the East Side speaks a language other than English and does not speak English proficiently. And about more than a quarter of the Hilltop currently identifies as Black or African American, and that neighborhood has been and is seen as the center of Tacoma's Black community. Overall, the median household income is lower in both neighborhoods in Tacoma and Pierce County overall. And it's for these reasons that we focus on these two neighborhoods, the East Side and the Hilltop, in this study. We don't look system-wide, but I think it's important to acknowledge that there are operating needs system-wide. The library currently operates at a lower level of service in all of its branches than it would like to, and then many peers do. And that there are probably other neighborhoods that are potentially other neighborhoods that could benefit from an additional library service point. But our focus and our charge was to look at the east side and the hilltop. I'll just review a few aspects of our work. I'm very proud of the engagement work that happened through this process. It was extremely robust, and I can't take any credit for it. I think Vivian, who's co-presenting tonight, deserves a lot of that credit. She and the engagement team did just tremendous work on the consulting side. And we partnered really well with 12 community partners throughout the two neighborhoods, and they did amazing work to make sure that we heard really representative voices from the two neighborhoods that we were looking at. So our community partners who hosted events that brought in about 1,200, more than 1,200 participants. And we're really confident that those participants are truly representative of the East Side and Hilltop neighborhoods. We also had about 2,500 people respond to 2 online surveys. And that included people outside of our 2 neighborhoods of focus, and was an important piece of input as well. We also did some visioning workshops, both on the ground and online, with over 100 participants in those, and then additional listening sessions later in the process that brought in another 30 people or so. In addition to library staff who were out in the public at community events and spoke with hundreds of people. So there was a lot of community engagement, both online and on the ground in person. And that voice is really the voice that we want to bring forward tonight. It's what we heard from the community. We had an amazing project advisory committee that Kate put together with great representation from different partners in the community. And they really helped steer the effort and make sure that our engagement was robust and that our consideration of our findings was really thorough. We augmented the community engagement as well with some stakeholder interviews with key partners, folks at Metro Parks Tacoma, Tacoma Community House, and Tacoma Housing Authority, and others. In addition to the engagement, which was a big focus, we also did an architectural assessment of the main library and Motet branch as well. We toured the neighborhoods, obviously, and looked at the physical presence of the existing buildings and their ability to serve. David Strauss and his team at SHKS Architects led that effort. And then Michael Adamson of Fair and Piers did a transportation analysis to look at access to libraries and potential new libraries by car, but also really importantly by foot, by bike, by transit. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Susan Kent brought terrific library experience and thinking about not just current libraries, but really the future of libraries. And as we listened to the voice of the community, we really wanted to be grounded in what libraries can be, not necessarily what they are currently in Tacoma or have been in the past. So I'll turn it to Vivian here to talk through our evaluative framework and some initial findings.
Thanks, Brian. So if you recall, the project purpose was to really investigate what are the best ways to restore library services in these 2 neighborhoods. So when we think about what do we mean by best, we came up with 4 criteria areas. And really first and foremost within this is alignment with the city values, understanding how the library is part of the city, and grounding ourselves in community benefit as defined by the communities themselves. So just as Brian was saying, we put a lot of effort into community engagement and not wanting to develop any services that didn't resonate with the community's needs and desires. The second criteria area is about the impact on library services, including the main library and the Northwest Room. As Brian said, this was not a system-wide study. This was truly focused on the needs and desires and the best way to restore services in these 2 neighborhoods, yet any decisions that are made to remedy the disinvestment in these neighborhoods would have some system impact. And there's also some opportunity to consider relationships with the main library given its proximity to the Hilltop neighborhood. The third area, thanks again to Farah and Piers, was looking at location and accessibility. So whatever library services are delivered, really wanting to make sure that those are accessible to as many people in Tacoma as possible, and really considering the transportation and transit networks that were available to make sure that any services that result as part of this feasibility study are really well utilized. And finally, of course, the financial feasibility, considering both capital and operating costs in any decisions that are made. So each of those 4 areas breaks down into further sub criteria, and there's quite a lot of information on this slide, but what we really wanted to communicate was that we came into this study in September with this idea of restoring library services. We were very clear that it wasn't necessarily a facility. There are many ways to deliver library services today, especially given digital services and pop-ups and new ways of using spaces. So we started with quite a broad funnel and did some evaluation of what we're calling alternative service models, such as express libraries, kiosks, or lockers, and mobile services. But when it came to evaluating these against community benefit, the equity statements put out by the city, the community vision, our whole first round of engagement throughout September to December of 2021 was really asking the community, what do you want and need out of library services? This is where some of those alternatives failed the test. And we'll talk a little bit more neighborhood by neighborhood, but it became really clear that community members envisioned a physical place for community gathering that just couldn't be delivered through some of these alternative service models. But one thing that did come up and generated a lot of discussion was co-location opportunities. And again, at that top of the funnel, we had lots of ideas come up about potential co-location opportunities. What is kind of an alternative way of delivering that physical space that could also share resources and potentially be more cost effective, both on a capital and operating side. It could create kind of agglomeration of resources for patrons who have transportation barriers. It would be super convenient to be able to access multiple services in one trip. And then also the agglomeration effect of increased traffic on placemaking and safety and foot traffic for local businesses. So co-location was one of those things that came up at the top of the funnel and really persisted throughout the feasibility study. So you'll see that thread continues as something that is truly feasible and could be really exciting in the delivery of library services. What we did find throughout the study, though, is that not all co-location opportunities are equally desirable. So what came out as highly desirable could be co-location with housing development. And we know that there is a lot of housing development happening. So it feels like an opportunity rich area. Parks and recreation is another great opportunity, community-based organizations, and possibly adjacent to sharing a parcel with school properties. What we found as less desirable in that bucket of co-location would be within schools themselves, and for security and operational concerns. It really would not be ideal to try to deliver those two objectives within the same space, the objectives of schooling and having a public service library. And the other one that came up as not quite so desirable would be with fire stations. So again, kind of an operational consideration. when you're thinking about the uses of that shared space. So co-location remains a really exciting layer on top of the recommendations that we're about to present to you. And I'll be going through some of what we found on the east side specifically, and Brian will talk more about the hilltop. So just grounding ourselves in what we know about the east side demographically and geographically, it's a large neighborhood, currently home to about 32,000 people. There are certain pockets that really seem to be growing in population. So that map is showing some population projections going out to 2045. So the area around Motay on McKinley Hill is really expected to grow, as is around Salishan and Portland Avenue Park, as well as a southern pocket between 64th and 72nd Streets. So those were some initial focus areas. The east side, though, there's a large population. It's really spread over quite a large geography with limited transit access, and walkability is definitely a challenge as the neighborhood is divided by arterials, train tracks, and slopes and ridges throughout. Currently, the people living on the east side who responded to our survey and our engagement told us that they mainly use Moore and Motay. So Moore is just on the western, just outside the neighborhood to the west, and Motay is up on McKinley Hill, but it is the smallest branch in the Tacoma Public Library system, holding about 4% of the system collection in about 5,000 square feet. But it is really well loved by the neighborhood on McKinley Hill, as we again learned throughout community engagement. Moore is a very active library, about 15,500 square feet, and they see 13% of system collection and circulation. So really great assets currently on the east side. But if you think geographically, it was clear that there was a gap kind of between the north and the south extremes of the neighborhood, and then also towards the eastern side of the neighborhood. So when we asked the community what they wanted out of restored library services, it was all about celebrating and convening the assets of the East Side's diverse communities. We heard so much about how people love to be East Siders, because it's a place where you hear multiple languages throughout the day. Neighborhoods are super friendly and welcoming, and it just feels like a really thriving and diverse place. So this translated in terms of library services in wanting a brick and mortar branch or a physical location that could be a community gathering and a community building space. So not necessarily just a place to circulate materials, but really a place for neighborhoods to get together and learn from each other and socialize. Community members imagined spacious, accessible, warm spaces with art that's really reflective of their cultural diversity, maybe cafes and food and other ways to participate and share culture in a library space. And then, of course, given the limited transit options and challenges with walkability, there was a real desire to make that a priority. So making sure that as many East Siders as possible could visit this place. So having gathered that community vision, we undertook a second round of community engagement in the spring of 2022 that really put forth 4 different ways that you could make this idea of a community gathering space that's accessible to many East Siders come to life. So those options were to have 2 medium new libraries in different parts of the neighborhood, to upgrade and expand Motay to have additional space. It doesn't currently have meeting and community gathering space, but as I mentioned, it's very well loved by the neighborhood. So there could be an opportunity to upgrade that space and make sure that it's accessible and well known beyond the neighborhood, and maybe street presence on McKinley Avenue could help. There could be an option around significant or refurbishing Motay and more and extending their operating hours and outreach. Or you could imagine creating a large new library in the neighborhood, possibly in that geographic gap that I mentioned earlier. So when we tested these 4 options, it became really clear the dark blue band furthest to the left is showing the % of respondents who said this was my top choice. And then it goes down from there, progressing to the right. So the lighter shade of blue are people who said that would be their second choice. And then all the way on the right-hand side, in the gray is saying it's the percentage of respondents who fully did not support the option as presented. So it was pretty interesting to see, one, that East Side residents, if you filtered just for East Side residents, their priorities largely aligned with residents or respondents to the survey overall. And 43 to 44% of respondents, no matter where they came from, felt that creating 2 medium libraries in different parts of the neighborhood would be the best option to serve the East Side. And going all the way down and to the right, the option of creating a large new library was not so popular. So what we also asked about the rationale behind these selections. Why did you rank things the way that you did? And the top priorities were really about access and walkability. So having 2 more modest branches in different parts of the neighborhood felt like it would definitely serve more people. And there was some concern about the cost of a large new library. So they didn't want a large fancy branch. So they just really wanted a neighborhood branch that was really easily accessible. And there was also noted quite a bit of support for upgrading and or expanding Motay. So there's an opportunity to modernize the building and attract patrons to Motay with new amenities. And again, the rationale behind that, folks really felt like it was a great asset that the library already has, and it would just require some investment to make it really, really amazing. So we found that overall, regarding Motay and Main, there was a real desire not to want to surplus those properties or sell them or close them to be able to fund other library services. There was a real interest in kind of preserving the assets we have and making them work for the system. So 78% opposed closing Motay to fund additional library access, and 87% of East Side residents specifically were against that idea. So going back to our criteria, so when we published that survey, it was really meant to help us benchmark some of the key trade-offs in developing recommendations. So is it 1 large library or is it 2 medium libraries? How attached are people to Motay? Would they be willing to trade a more dated building for a new building somewhere that is in potentially a better location? So we got answers to that question through the survey process. And the analysis ensuing from that was to develop a recommended option. So not exactly what we surveyed about, but one that was able to fold in some of the other criteria such as location and accessibility, impact on the library system, and financial feasibility. And what you see highlighted there in the top band in green is the recommended option, which would be to add a new branch along Portland Avenue. So this would be in one of those population hotspots that was highlighted on the map, and creating access to the South Shan neighborhood, which is really expected to grow. And then it would also include renovation of Motay, again, to leverage our existing assets and to really think about what was described as the community wants and desires when we renovate that space. So likely making it a little bit more inviting for patron interactions and community gatherings and meeting spaces. And then it also really recognizes that McKinley Hill was one of the again, in the population projections for 2045, one of the areas that was really expected to grow. So that is what will be in the final report as the recommended option. But we should also note that there were several other options that were evaluated throughout this process. And one of them was to phase the work a little bit more in terms of adding the new branch on Portland and the work to be done on Motay. And some of the options that were considered, but kind of failed the stress test enough to be rejected at this point, would be to simply renovate and expand Motay without adding a new East Side branch that really felt like it wasn't going to meet the gaps that we knew existed in the neighborhood. Again, kind of the inverse of that, adding a new branch along Portland Avenue and closing Motay wouldn't add any service points to the neighborhood, and again, wouldn't be really meeting those gaps. And then finally, adding 2 branches to the east side felt cost prohibitive. And again, that is why you see that in the rejected options page. And it really was a matter of both capital and operating costs when you put this all together with the package that we're thinking about for both neighborhoods and consideration of what happens with the system. So that is it for the east side. Brian, you want to just take it through for Hilltop? Or should we pause?
Oops. Why don't we go ahead and present through, and then we'll take questions through on all of this. So I'll do something similar here on the Hilltop of kind of describe the context, what we heard from the community, and then what our recommendations are. So we know that Hilltop is currently home to about 15,000 people, so about half that of the east side. As Vivian noted, there is population expanding as well in the Hilltop, both up on the Hilltop proper around the core neighborhood business district, and also down around more the downtown area, and then further south. So this future population growth played an important role in our thinking of our recommendations. The Hilltop, in contrast to the east side, is well served by sidewalk infrastructure and transit. And of course, there's the new Link Light rail station that's slated to open in 2023, right in the neighborhood business core. And so that's an important feature that we thought about as we think about the future of service to the Hilltop and also service to Tacoma citywide through its main library. The neighborhood business district is really the center of that neighborhood. So again, contrasting that with the east side, there is that cohesive center on the Hilltop. And there are a lot of businesses there. There's a lot of nonprofits there. There's also a lot of housing coming in. So there is considerable development pressure with limited developable land, but we also found some pretty interested partners who might be interested in co-locating a library in their space as they develop on the hilltop. So hearkening back to Vivian's discussion of co-location with housing or other services, there's a lot of possibilities on the hilltop for that. Main is currently the library that serves the hilltop. So we know that about 55% of hilltop residents and even 14% of East Side respondents to our survey use the main library fairly frequently. It has about 60% of the total square footage of the library system. So the building itself, not all of it is used for library services, particularly during the pandemic, 95,000 square feet. So it's a very large building, but it only contains or only services about 13% of the overall circulation for the whole system. So it's underutilized in some ways. And as we talked with folks about the main library, it was hard to find anyone who would really express a lot of affection for the main. The location itself is found to be pretty challenging, particularly to hilltop residents. That slope that separates the hilltop from the current location of Main was cited as a barrier to access. There was also discussion about the street environment there around the Main feeling less than safe. And then the building itself, once you get inside the building, just doesn't inspire, doesn't invite. It's found to be cold and unwelcoming. And as we look at it from a point of view of serving the community with contemporary library services, it doesn't lend itself well to that. When you think about creating a warm, inviting community hub, it doesn't have that feel. It's important to note that there are two portions of that building. When I talk about Main, I mean both the Northwest Room and the Carnegie Building, and then the 1990 addition that sits adjacent to that. And those two portions of the Main facility are intertwined in terms of their infrastructure. HVAC and other systems exist in Main in the addition that provide service to the Carnegie Building. So separating them would be difficult. And then the Northwest Room does have significant storage of its resources in the basement of Main. And they're contained in a pretty ideal environment in that it's cool and dark. And it's down in the basement and it's relatively close to the Northwest Room. But that condition is also not great for staff because they're also down in that cool and dark basement, laboring away in what I would describe as very less than ideal circumstances. So these were all considerations in our mind as we thought about how best to serve the hilltop and how best to invest in a main library that serves the whole city of Tacoma population. So what we heard from the community when we asked Hilltop residents about their desires for library services was very much, very similar in a lot of ways to Vivian described for the East Side. We want a building, we want a bricks and mortar investment in our community that serves as a welcoming place for us to gather, for us to interact, a place for kids to go after school, a place to meet across generations, a place to get access to other services as well as library services, a place to access collections, of course, and public access computers, and then also all these other things that people desire as an active civic space in their community. We also heard loud and clear that this would like to be a branch facility that reflects the history of the community and that is reflective that Hilltop continues to be the center of the Black community in Tacoma. And so the community vision that we heard is to amplify and connect Hilltop's unique past, present, and future as a Black neighborhood. So when we went out to the public and asked about their preferences for libraries in this space to serve Hilltop, we asked about a medium library inside the neighborhood business district, so really close to the core there. Perhaps another option could be a major upgrade to Main and the Northwest Room, and then establishing an express library up in the neighborhood business district. And by express library, we mean a quite small space, maybe 2,500 square feet. It would be staffed and it would provide access to services, but it would lack the ability to provide space for community members to really gather in groups and to have functions or events in that space. It'd be quite space constrained. And then the third option was a large new library, perhaps located outside the neighborhood business district core, reflecting the fact that it may be difficult to locate a large library quite close to the core. So responses came back that most respondents favor creating that medium-sized library right within the neighborhood business district core. And in talking and in conversation with members of the public and also members of the advisory committee, we heard consistently that there's a desire to have this library as close to the core of the hilltop as possible to provide that immediacy of access. There was less support for closing Main. So you'll see over on the right, there are some ideas that we offered as well to eliminate service at current service points as a way to fund investment in new libraries. And fully 75% of Hilltop residents do not support the idea of closing that main library. So there is still some attachment to the main. So we took all of this input in mind, and as Vivian described with Eastside, we also applied the broader criteria of thinking about community benefits, but also location and accessibility, the impact on the library system, in particular impact to the Northwest Room, and then cost as well as our considerations. And I want to be clear that the Hilltop community did not ask for the main library to be located within the Hilltop, but we had to think long and hard about how best to serve the broader community. And our recommendation is to open a significant new library on the Hilltop, to renovate the Carnegie building and the renovation as well, the newly renovated portion of the building as well, so that the Carnegie could be a terrific home for the Northwest Room with additional space for resources and programming there. And then the existing, the 1990 edition would be used for library offices and also nonprofit offices, some of which are currently housed on the second floor. And then by locating that large new library on the Hilltop, it would both serve the Hilltop community and also be very accessible via link light rail to much of the rest of the city of Tacoma, and in fact serve as the system's new main library. I think a strong alternative would be to add a new branch on Hilltop of a smaller size to renovate the main library and retain a single floor of public services there that would continue to function as the main library for the system. And in both cases, all of the back office functions and the staff would stay in the current building. They get to come out of the basement perhaps, but they would stay in that current building and provide services from there. Our rejected option in this case would be to add a new branch on Hilltop and then open 2 floors of public services on the main, in the main building currently. And that has 2 detractions to it. One is that it would displace the nonprofits that are currently housed on the second floor of Main. And secondly, it's the most expensive option, both from a capital point of view and from an operations point of view, because of the scale of operations of adding a branch and then keeping 2 floors of public services in Main. So I'll quickly recap our recommendations here, and then we'll see if there are questions from the group and be happy to go back to both neighborhoods and delve in more deeply. When we sum the capital costs for our recommended options, both on the east side and on the Hilltop, we see a capital investment of around $78 million. That would likely require bond financing, and I understand that the city's currently evaluating different ways of providing funding support for capital investment in libraries and other capital facilities, and this would certainly be at the scale that it would benefit from capital bond financing. There may be state and federal grants as well. Philanthropic contributions are certainly an idea. They've been well used in both the East Side Community Center and Tacoma Community House and other capital investments in recent years, but they're likely not going to fulfill a significant portion of the capital cost that would be borne by the city. On the operating side, we looked exhaustively at staffing and maintaining the buildings that we're providing, as well as the central staff that are needed to manage those additional staff and to help support the technology and the circulations at additional service points. And all told, we see an increase of about $4 million over the current or status quo budget for the library. And there we think, we'd be looking at either drawing on additional city dollars through the general fund, or perhaps considering an operating levy specific to the library to support those operations. On the operations side, grants and philanthropy can be augments, they can be supplements, but they can't really provide support for core library services. And I just want to end by saying that, when we talked to people in our surveys about these ideas, there was strong support for both a capital bond and for a voter approved operating levy. Over about 75% of the people we spoke with expressed support for that. I think more study needs to be done with a broader population of voters to understand their support. But there's clearly strong interest in these neighborhoods of helping to pay for these investments. A final point is on phasing. We think both neighborhoods are equally diverse and deserving of additional investment and library services, but we have to acknowledge that things are moving pretty quickly on the hilltop. And so we recommend staying in pace with that conversation and even looking to secure space in some of that development as quickly as possible, because those development considerations are being finalized even as we speak and in the years to come. So that concludes our presentation. Be happy to take discussion and answer any questions at this point. We can go back to any of the slides that may be of interest.
So I was waiting for Councilmember Blocker to be on since he's the chair.
You might start your questions.
Is that okay with you, Councilmember Daniels?
Yeah.
Kate, this was a great, I want to say that I did talk with Kate and Sarah Irish yesterday, and I want to thank you all for this incredible work that's been put together to examine the needs of the library. And I had a couple questions, and I've actually, now this feels like kind of the third time I've talked about this, and so it's really exciting to hear about. Can you tell me how many people actually use the Mote Library and how many use the Moore Library?
I can't tell you off the top of my head, but I can get those numbers to you.
Okay, I just was curious about usage of the library, like how many people use them. And then
sorry, I do remember that Brian said earlier that Moore constitutes 13% of our total circulation, but we didn't have that. It would be a much smaller percentage for Mote.
Yeah, and then obviously the Moore Library is also being used by people on the south end of Tacoma, right? Because it's kind of straddling the east side and the south end.
Yes.
And then the other question I had is, what does it mean by a medium-sized library? What is that compared to how big? Like Mote, you said was 5,000 square feet. So could you just give me an idea? And the other one you're looking at is 93,000. So I'm trying to figure out what the difference is.
Go ahead, Brian, because I'm not sure what the exact number is, so I don't want to misspeak.
Sure. So we used the figure of 8,000 square feet as a medium-sized library when we were doing our modeling. So behind our costs, it's really driven by square footage for capital costs and staffing. So we had to pick a number. We chose 8,000 square feet for that. And then for the recommended option on the Hilltop, we looked at 25,000 square feet.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. Oh, that's right, because the main library is 90,000. Okay. And then when you talk about the East Side Library, are you thinking that it would be like somewhere in the THA property area, Tacoma Housing Authority area? Or what were you thinking? Where would it be located exactly off Portland? I just am trying to understand.
Viv, do you mind speaking to that? And I'll just pull up a map, actually, we have of the different places that we looked at.
Yeah, there's a variety of options up and down Portland Avenue, and we did some initial look at property availability on Portland. So this recommendation kind of includes a pretty wide north-south swath, as Brian is showing on the screen here. It wouldn't be on THA property. We're thinking on the west side of Portland Avenue, so super accessible to THA residents, but we would be looking to acquire property from a different owner.
So it's on the opposite side of THA then?
Yeah, on Portland, but opposite THA.
Huh, okay. That's a pretty busy street, so that means a lot of people are gonna have to cross the busy street to get to the library. Is that what you're thinking? That, or at THA, at the South Shan?
I mean, it could be on either side. We did evaluate, there was one option with THA that would be like within Salishan. That didn't end up panning out because it didn't feel quite as accessible to people who were not THA residents. I believe, Brian, maybe you can confirm that there are properties on both sides of the street that are not THA properties.
That's correct, yeah. And I think one other option that should be mentioned is possible co-location in Portland Avenue Park with Metro Parks Tacoma. We had just really high-level conversations with leadership at Metro Parks Tacoma, and they did express interest in exploring feasibility of co-location of libraries and community centers, both on the Hilltop and in the east side. So I think that should be in the consideration as well, though I acknowledge it's a little bit of a further walk for Salishan residents to get to that park.
Okay, great. And then if it's okay, I have just a couple things to say about the one on the Hilltop. And I just wanted to say that part of my interest in the, and I mentioned this yesterday, in the Hilltop Library, is that there's a huge portion of the North Slope and other areas like Stadium that don't have any access to library. And, you know, the only library there is Wheelock. And so it's sort of like, you know, when we talk about services, I know we talk about the Hilltop, but I hope that they are okay that other people are going to want to use the library that's located in the Hilltop, and that they don't feel that they're being overburdened by that population, because I can see people wanting to utilize that because it's much closer to their neighborhood. And I hope that that's understood, that when we did that when you did your little population map for the Hilltop Library, it actually, I see it not just, I see people walking 10 blocks to go to the library, and it actually ends up being a little further if you pass like past the hospital, that people would be probably interested in going to that library. And I hope that that speaks to me, that it's serving a couple many neighborhoods is what I was thinking. And that's sort of something that I was really charmed by, because it didn't just end up being, it ended up being something that I really value, that the Hilltop has a library, because I feel like they're so underserved, but I also felt like it could be supported in so many ways by other neighborhoods that would utilize it and want to own and patronize and, you know, want to say, this is really important to have in our community.
Council member, that's the spirit behind our recommended option for the Hilltop, is to invest in a larger facility there that serves Hilltop really well, reflects that community, feels like it's reflective of that community context, provides services direct to that community, and serves as a facility that invites people from elsewhere in Tacoma into that. And so that's why we're recommending a larger facility there.
On board. So thank you for answering my questions. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rumball. Any additional questions?
Yeah, I mean, I have questions. I'm kind of curious what the staff and board think about the engagement that was done. I mean, we heard from the community what they think, but I am curious where you all are at on this.
Oh, you're muted, Sarah.
I can tell you my opinion. I'm with the community. I know the community already spoke, and I respect the one about the Hilltop to be separate and be just serving the community, because they've been asking for that for many years, even before I became part of the board. So I totally respect and want to honor that part of the request. And as we know, the East Side, people are, this is one of the poorest areas of the city. So people are more concerned on surviving. Maybe that's why the numbers of participants are smaller than the Hilltop. And, you know, and I think for many of those residents, the library is not a priority when they have to survive and think about how they're gonna be getting their next meal or paying the rent. I know that the library is needed, but that's why the other reason why they didn't have that much participation is not that they don't care, but it's they don't have the means to be involved in advocating when they're trying to survive. That's why, but I would love the library on the Hilltop where has more access to the people they actually, you know, like more Central Tacoma, between the Central Tacoma and the Hilltop, where the Martin Luther King Library used to be, in that area where there is nothing there. Yeah, so that looking for something around that area where that park on, what is it? Sprague and 13, on that area around there, that'd be a good zone to have a library with access to part of Central Tacoma and the Hilltop. I don't know, that's something that I suggest, but I know that there's other possibilities.
I think one thing that stands out to me is that we have this, like, one thing I think that is not fair is that we have two places that deserve services. And it feels like we're being asked to choose between the two. And that is always the ask, to choose between Hilltop and East Side. And I feel like that's really unfortunate that we even have to make that decision. And so I'm curious I'm interested in a plan that gets at both. And yeah, so I mean, I don't think I have a clear question, but I was really curious about your thoughts.
I'm with you on that one. You know, I wish we have like a way to get money and don't have to deal with these situations and have to choose. But I think at this point, even though it's not fair because one community spoke more than other, you know, but I think a decision has to be made by whoever got the power in this situation.
So question to staff, what are the recommended, I appreciate the recommendations in terms of the locations, but in terms of final decisions, what is outlined in terms of the next steps?
Well, I think we believe that the next step is to pursue funding. We're interested in fulfilling both communities' wishes. certainly didn't want to give the impression that we were wanting to choose or wanting somebody to choose one over the other. I think it's fairly common knowledge that the city is looking at capital bond in facilities needs going, existing facilities needs. And this data that we have now would be folded into that consideration. I can't speak expertly to to how we go about getting either a levy or a bond, but I think for us, it's really important to keep the conversation going while we pursue those options. We don't want this study to be something that gets filed away and gathers dust over time. And so it's my intention to keep that conversation going in whatever way that we can while we're investigating those funding options.
Thank you for that, Kate. And just, thinking about the context of this, for the way I recall this, it was this feasibility study was never to pit one community against another community. It was, my understanding, it was set up to literally just see what is possible in both of these communities, right? And then from there, obviously, there's a question of what makes the most sense in terms of funding, what makes the most sense in terms of resources. Also, I think seems like somewhat of an equity lens was applied to this, and hope my goal, if I had if I was able to have my wishes, would be to figure out pathways to get funding to address the needs in both communities, and at the same time do that in a way where opportunity has to align, and we're talking about development or utilizing space with THA, for example. Our plans would have to be in alignment with that work. So it probably wouldn't even be dictated off of what we want as our objective to get the funding, so that we are in a position to align our goals with other potential funders or potential developers or builders and things like that. So there's a lot of variables here, and it's not just a decision that the city of Tacoma can make. But again, to Kate's point, I don't want to see the feasibility study just get set on a shelf. I would like us to take some action steps towards it. But again, there's a lot of variables. But I think if the focus is get funding, that puts us in the best position to be ready for to capitalize on other opportunities. So those are my thoughts.
I see Trustee LaFrance has, I'm sorry, I'm not the chair of this meeting. I'm sorry.
No, sorry. I'm supposed to be chair, but at the same time, I'm on my small phone. It's hard for me to see hands raised. So
Got
if
it.
someone catches that, just go ahead and speak up.
Kate, were you gonna add in?
Oh, I was just gonna say that Donna LaFrance had her hand up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Councilman Blocker. But, we're all community, so that's really what this was all about. And I was hoping, just as well as you, as well as Kate and Sarah, that our intent was to be able to restore services into those communities that need it, that they have spoken to us loud and clear. I think it was an unfortunate decision to stop library services when it did, regardless of what the reasons was. And there are some longstanding consequences to that. But when you're talking about your community, and when you're talking about children, and when you're talking about development and growth, there's just some non-negotiables that should be always in consideration. And I think right now, unfortunately, due to the state of affairs coming in off of a pandemic, supposedly that still looks like it's still growing and still here. The increase in prices, ridiculous increase in prices across the board. We feel, I feel like we are forced to have to do something now to keep the message before the community, because one, we are about community. And this is something that is needed and critical, whether there was a pandemic or not, whether there was enough money or not. It is something that when you are a library and you are a vibrant entity into your community, the resources are there in which to serve your community from beginning, from the little ones all the way up to our seniors as well. And it seems like we got a lot of catching up to do just in facility maintenance over the years, and that's expensive. And then I think the unfortunate, and it's like bittersweet. You have development going on, which is great, but if we want to be able to be a part of the need that we have, here's where the force is coming in. We got to do something now. And I hate being in a haste makes waste type of situation. And I hate being in a situation where you got to do something because you got to do something because if not, you really don't know what tomorrow will bring other than increased prices and increased costs and increased resources. So I think this is a collaborative effort, and we need the council and your vision as well that aligns with the strategic plan, what our goals and what our heart is for our community, and figure out what is the best course of action. And I would not say that, I will say that it was always about community and inclusiveness in all of the cultures and the ethnicity that's either on the hilltop, on the east side, and within the city limits of Tacoma. There's a need to express what's important to you and be recognized for that without it meaning that some other culture or ethnicity is not important. That's not the message that we're sending. And you're absolutely right. We should not have to be in a situation where it even looks like we have to choose between two communities. That's not how we got started. That's not what we even thought about. It wasn't even something that ran across our mind that we would be having this kind of conversation about that possibility being out there on the table. So there it is.
Thank you for
Excited to meet all of you guys and see you.
Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
Chair Blocker, if I may ask, may I give an additional comment?
Yep, please do.
Great, thank you. I just want to be super clear. I feel remiss if I don't step up and say what we heard from the two communities and what our recommendation is for investment in new libraries in both communities. Absolutely, the East Side just as deserving and just as desiring of a library as the Hilltop. I think there is a need to move quickly, and I think it will take the city there's a need to move quickly on the Hilltop. It will take the city some time to secure the full funding necessary to design and construct new libraries. And our recommendation is to try to secure space on the Hilltop even before that full funding is available, but continue to pursue the full funding necessary to then build on that site and construct the library. This is not an area of great expertise for me, but I believe you would be able to acquire development rights for less than the full cost of the actual construction. And there may be ways to do that on existing resources while the full funds necessary for construction and renovation of Main and Motte and then construction on the East Side and the Hilltop while that larger fundraising process is underway.
Nope, that's a great point. And I'm sure everybody knows the price of real estate on the Hilltop is going to go up. It's just going up by the minute. And if something doesn't happen there, we can miss a great opportunity. And the price of materials, everything's getting more expensive. So that's something that we're up against. And that's why it's really important that we act now and start thinking about strategies and funding and collaborative opportunities.
I have a question.
Yep, go ahead.
I was surprised that I didn't see, well, first of all, I'm really excited about the idea of co-locations, and I'm even more excited about what that could look like specifically outside of what I already think about, like THA, stuff like that. I think that we could get really creative about that. And I think partnerships are going to be one of the easiest ways we could get $80 million, or we can not get $80 million and figure out somebody else to get $80 million and figure out how we work together to kind of push the goal. I really, really, really appreciate the recognition of the services that are at the main library and the nonprofits and stuff like that. So there's like a recognition of space, and I'm trying to figure out what part of people wanting to keep the main library was about nonprofits and about the public services, and which part was more about what the library traditionally does, and wanting to maintain that. Because if we understand the difference between those, or what the kind of motivation was, maybe we can get creative about, I think that there's ways to be creative about keeping services that maybe don't have to come out of the library budget, but maybe could be a different kind of partnership or something like that to maintain what's desired there. Another thing I'm thinking about as it relates to Hilltop is, again, we just talked about real estate, and beyond the prices going up, like just the sheer space of what we're needing or what we're wanting. I don't know how many, there's probably only a few places that this could go. And so I wonder what co-location could look like up on Hilltop if it isn't in one of the developments that already have space. You know, if we're talking about moving one big one and making a huge one, I understand why THA wouldn't be the best, because it would be big enough for just kind of the neighborhood, but not really for the entire, for several neighborhoods. To my original question of where, what I saw missing, or what I had a desire to see, was this combination of technology. And I'm thinking about, where does that play a factor in, like, in services, or what people are desiring to see from their libraries? Because if we think about access to technology, I think that that opens up other partnerships that we might not have been thinking about, or different ways to pay for things that we might not have been thinking about. So that's all I'll say. I know that wasn't a question, but those are just things that have been kind of going through my mind as we're talking about this.
I can respond a little bit to the first question about Maine. And it's interesting to think about two things being true at once, which is people don't tend to have a lot of love for Maine when you ask them about it, but yet they, I think, value the services that come from it, and also see that it's an asset that should be retained rather than leveraged for any new sort of construction effort. I think also for us, realistically, we have our IT infrastructure at Maine. Of course, we have administrative offices, but those could be relocated. We have our centralized services, so like our processing and our ordering department is here. So for us, there's a compelling reason to keep the space for those functions, as well as the Northwest Room. The Northwest Room is one of our most incredibly popular and valued services. And we have, as Brian said, just a considerable amount of local history archives that are in our basement. And we thought really sort of long and hard about, if we relocated the Northwest Room somehow, like how could we get the appropriate storage in terms of square footage that they need, and have it be cool and preferably windowless. And so practically speaking, just even for those collections, it makes sense to hang on to Maine. And then the other reason is actually population projections looking out to 2045. While we don't have a large community around Maine right now, there could be in the future. So there could be a time when we would want to expand out of that Express Library Northwest Room service model to, oh, now we have a population here, let's open up more of the building for library services.
say something?
Is that helpful, Councilmember?
Yes, yes. I have one question about the downtown part and then, but it looks like Susan has something too.
Oh, thank you. If I could just say a couple words. Many of the people who responded on the community survey and in all of the outreach talked about the importance of access to technology, both in the library and through their homes to the library, and the need for classroom space, teaching space, technology connection space for all age groups and classes for all age groups. So that is sort of inherent in what the new libraries, as well as what the current libraries are providing to the people in Tacoma. But I just wanted to say that in many cases, when you do a study like that, people talk about how it's a roadmap to the future, but don't look at it. Don't look at this study as a roadmap and what we've given you as a roadmap. Look at it as a GPS, because really, as things change and unknowns happen and opportunities happen, things are going to swerve and you're going to take a different road than you originally thought you were going to take, because the new road goes clearly to where you want to go. And the old road has been blocked by a pandemic or something that we never thought of. So this really is a GPS to the future. And to sort of echo Brian, it was never about choosing a neighborhood. It was about how do you provide the best library services to both neighborhoods. One might have to go first because of situations, but it's not in the either or. It's moving forward on the GPS to get where you want to go.
Yep. Thank you for that.
If I might add just one more thing to Councilmember Daniels' questions. We had some initial conversations with developers on the Hilltop that there's some real excitement about co-location, and a 25,000 square foot library is possible. But they weren't very in-depth conversations, right? These were very exploratory, but I think there is interest on the Hilltop there, and a larger library could fit. We also had some very exciting conversations with Tacoma-based philanthropy and foundations and others. And wow, talk about excitement in the idea of creating a civic hub where there's library services as well as access to other services. And we all know that space is a huge challenge for nonprofit organizations and community-based organizations that are serving the community. So it was very tantalizing, but also similarly exploratory. And to Susan's point, the GPS, I think, would guide you back to those conversations in the future to really explore, well, what could this look like now that we know that we really want to locate a library on the Hilltop or on the east side? Dig into those potential partnerships in more detail with the housing developers and with the local philanthropic community, and together establish a vision that's even more clear than what we've sketched out in this initial feasibility study.
Are the libraries downtown, like the college libraries, are those public at all?
I don't think
They
so.
are open to the public. I don't know. I don't think a lot of members of the public use them, and they don't have public library type materials. They're full of academic materials
Right.
that serve the university.
Got it.
And I'm not sure how you check out books. I know you could go into a university library, but checking out books, I'm not sure how you do that.
You can access the materials in there, and also you got opportunities for the students to get mentorships. Other students helping, even elementary school students can go to the UW library and they get a mentor.
That's
Can I say something? I wanted to, first off, I don't know where we got the idea that we were talking about one library over another library. I wanted to comment on the technology part because I am part of GPFC and we were talking about equity. And one of the things that I brought up was that as we're doing our equity study for the city and the library's talking about equity, that it's really important that we work together on that to make sure that we can in some way own some of those costs that might be associated with the library that making sure that we're really thinking with like TPU about how what the library gets is something that's supported by the city. And so I hope that as we're doing our equity study on technology, that we're also including the library and their needs in that, so that we're on like that we're not separate, that we're working together. And I also think that all of these partnerships we're talking about are really important. And I think that that as we look at funding, that will be what will help us be able to support and find ways to fund this, is by working as a community. And I think that this study is a really great study because it really is encompassing all the voices of the people who live here in these communities. And I think that just is so wonderful that people want that. Anyone who thought that libraries were dying doesn't know anything, because the pandemic just showed how important and significant they are. And I think as we move out of this, it's going to be even more impactful that we lean into the needs that our community has said they want with those libraries.
Thank you, Councilmember. All right. Any more questions, comments? I guess in terms of next steps, there doesn't sound like any decision needs to be made today. It's just a presentation in terms of recommendations, but I do suggest we come back together and figure out some kind of timeline that will help us move closer towards potential collaborative partnership with THA. Is that possible?
Are you asking me? If you are, my answer is yes, but.
Oh, okay, yeah, I just don't want to I don't want this to be the last conversation, and it doesn't seem
Yep.
like this is something that we are ready to send to the full council or anything like that.
Right.
But I want to make sure that the conversation continues and we're continuing to engage and look for opportunities and funding.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I look forward to future discussions.
Right. So I'll let you decide what that timeline looks like then, and you could get back.
Okay.
with-
Okay,
Is that works for you?
sure.
Thank you. How does that work for you, Councilmember Daniels and Councilmember Wimbaugh?
Sounds great.
All right. All right. Thank you. Any other comments from staff? All right. All right, we'll move on then to topics for upcoming meetings.
Thank you, Councilmember Blocker. So in 2 weeks, you have a presentation on tenant protections. 2 weeks after that, on August 11th, you'll be interviewing candidates for the Tacoma Area Commission on Disabilities. And your second meeting in August 25th, you'll be hearing a report on a youth and young adult violence reduction update from our Neighborhood and Community Services Department and the Health Department.
All right. Next, we have other items of interest. At our last meeting, council members shared their opportunities where they went to boards or commissions. Do you have anything we would like to share at this time? All right, hearing none. Then are there any other items of interest?
I have an item of interest, and you could help me out, Chair. I don't know if I'm interested in talking about it at the, like with the entire council, but maybe it could start here. I feel like we've been talking a lot about mental health lately, and I feel like what is unclear to me is kind of like, what is the city's role in mental health? And then what are like our options, and where, like, we obviously have gaps in our system. And so I'm trying to figure out what we do now in terms of services, and then what are the gaps and where do we need to be like thinking about I know we can't do everything and we're not supposed to be doing everything, but like there's parts that are the county and then there's parts that are the state. And so I'm trying to understand what the gaps are and where we need to be advocating as a city to ask for those gaps to be filled where they are, because I feel like the gaps are coming down to us to answer to. And I just want to understand them better. And I don't know who would give us that presentation, but I feel like it would live in this committee if it were to have one.
That's a great question. So what is the city's role in providing support around mental health services? My understanding is we collect money, that 1% mental health tax is the role that we play, and we use those funds to give to, or allot to, or grant to service providers to provide support around mental health. I think one of those organizations may be an organization like MDC. I
Right.
think part of the problem is, one, there's not enough MDCs or organizations like it. And then there's just not enough state or federal funding. So it's city's role, and the staff will correct me. My understanding is we collect money and we give out the money to service providers. Do we have any additional role other than that? Because there's DSHS, the county, state, and other agencies that deal with that.
So Councilmember Blocker, I can confirm that yes, you do have the 0.1% sales tax dedicated to mental health services. And if in my topics for upcoming meetings, I'd gone one date further, on September 8th, you are receiving a presentation from NCS on their contract funding recommendations with that 0.1% sales tax for mental health.
So that's it, Councilmember Daniels. We collect those pennies and we
And then-
find dedicated service providers to do the hard work. That's our role.
Okay, that's what I know. And so I guess my interest is in hearing from someone outside of us because we have to respond to those things regardless of if there are like within our wheelhouse or not. And so, I think when people talk to us about homelessness, they're largely a lot of the time talking about folks that are struggling with mental health at the same time. And I feel like they are struggling with the fact that we don't respond to those things. And I'm interested just to hear, not just about what we should do or could do. I'm actually more interested to hear about the system as a whole. And so maybe it could be from like MDC to kind of talk to us just about, or the county or somebody like that, to like kind of how they came in to talk about homelessness. And right, we have like our little part here that we do, but like they kind of talk about like where pieces are missing in the systems, just so that I can understand historically why we have been okay and why we're not okay now.
Can I make a comment based on that? Councilmember Daniels, I think you're correct in that what I know from the sustainability site, from talking to Comprehensive Life Resources, is that there is no service that we really are meeting for people who cannot be in certain encampments because of their mental health issues. And we are underserving populations. And I want to understand how maybe other city, like other counties, like, or maybe how the city of Seattle handles their issues with certain populations and what we're missing in our service stream of services for mental health. And I think we're missing something too. And when I talk to people who are experts on mental health and they look at where we're funding, they're saying we're missing something. And I don't understand that conversation because I'm not in that realm, but I kind of feel like it would be great to talk to someone else who has done this kind of work to better understand how we could be using resources or how we get more resources to meet the people that are not being served with the money that we have so far. Does that make sense? Am I off your topic?
No, you're on my topic for sure. When I thought about it, I was more thinking about not us spending more money I know we need alternative responses. We've talked about that several times, but I was more thinking about things that we could advocate for as a city, in terms of the gaps. Like, could we talk to the state? Can we write a letter to the state or county to help us address some of these middle areas? And I don't know if it's funding or programs or what, but like, I'm just trying to understand the historical, where we have been and where we need to go.
Council members, yes, I think we could continue to advocate. So I don't want to make this like there's a start doing something. Like, this is not a start advocating or start engaging the state or start like this. These are things that I wish we could explain it. I mean, but for staff purposes, is there a way we could frame this conversation so that we all can have a better understanding of where the gaps are and what could be done? And I'm sure community would love to hear this. And this might be a good education opportunity for all of us just to get a better understanding of where's the lack of resources in terms of mental health support.
What I might ask is, ahead of the September 8th presentation from NCS, if you can formulate specific questions about the gaps, if it's that you want to see what gaps exist in the current services, or if there are other questions you have, so we can prepare those staff ahead of time to answer those during the presentation.
Thank you for that. Because I mean, this conversation, it's a lot. There's a lot of variables, and there's very little in terms of what the city actually has impact over. So I think that's why staff is struggling a bit. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to speak for staff, but I'm just thinking like our circle of influence is really limited. So when we say who we're going to advocate to, I mean, I guess that's the county to invest more, or that's the state to invest more, or that's the federal government to invest more. So like, there's just, I think Washington State is ranked 48th in the country in terms of beds for people struggling with mental health issues. So I mean, this is a big problem, and I think the city only could do what the city can do. And yes, a lot of it falls on the city, but we're really limited, and even in terms of our advocacy ability and the impacts on that. So I think that's where some of the struggle is coming from on staff's end.
Okay, so I heard an additional question of what influence do we have? What strings can we pull?
Yeah, I think that's probably the main conversation, is the strings that we can pull. Because talking about things that are outside of our control, to me, it's a fruitless conversation to some extent. But
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for my colleagues. Also, I want them to be able to get the questions answered that they need.
That's what I'm curious about. And then if there are places where we have opportunities within the city, I think that would be just nice to know too. But I really wasn't expecting there to be, I knew you were going to say that, because I know that just isn't what we do, but maybe opportunities that we have, I guess, would be nice. I think that was what Councilmember Rumbaugh was saying, things that we could do within the city.
Okay. All right. Are we more confused or less confused now?
I am less confused, and I will reach out to Allison, and I'll put Claire on it just so she's aware of your request, Councilmember Davis.
Okay, it really could be from an outside agency. I feel like they have a lot of knowledge in the, like, that historical piece of the whole picture of, like, maybe we stopped funding Western State and now we see like an influx of, and this is what we're dealing with now. Like, that's the kind of picture that I'm trying to understand of, like, why people that are suffering don't, it feels like it never mind. I'll let it go, because it seems like you know where we're trying to go.
So there's this woman, I don't mean to interrupt, but there's this woman named Laura Van Tosh, and she's does a lot of work with mental health. And she might be the kind of person I think she, like, I don't remember exactly what agency she works with, but that might be someone, we might need to have some people like that come talk to us who might be able to help us understand how we got where we are. And I can get you her information if that's something that might be helpful.
Okay. All right, thank you, council member. If there are no other items of interest, do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
We do have one member of the public, so I can go and read the blurb. To request to speak during public comment for items on the agenda, please press the raise hand button near the bottom of your window or *9 on your phone. Your name or the last 4 digits of your phone number will be called out when it is your turn to speak.
You do have one public comment.
All right. Public comment. Could someone, I don't see the name of the person.
Paul, are you able to speak?
Yes, mic check. I'm able to speak and hear me.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So my name is Paul Jackson. I'm a retired research engineer. I have a PhD in computer engineering in 1998 from Texas A&M. And from that, I moved to Seattle to do research in virtual and augmented reality. About 2010 or so, I switched into video production. But while I was living in Seattle, I recorded a whole bunch of videos. And there's one thing in particular I remember. There is a place in Seattle where they let alcoholics live. And University of Washington did a study, and they realized that they saved the city money by allowing these people to live in this house. And what I want to do is put the link in the chat, but the chat is disabled. So if somebody could let me do that.
We cannot allow chat in the standing committee meetings. You can email it to the city clerk's office at cityclerk@cityoftacoma.org.
Great, thank you. I'll do that. And I'll stand down. So thank you for letting me talk.
All right, thank you. If there's no one else here for public comment, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. So have a great evening.
Hi.
Everyone.